Good morning, and thank you for joining the session, the SDN track. I believe it will be very fruitful and interesting to all of you all. So we thought of giving a little bit of introduction about the whole SDN scenario before individual speakers come up and talk about topics. Because SDN per se is very large, we'll have topics about networking, analytics, as well as PC, but we'll do a little bit for coverage as to how SDN started, a little brief history, and then we will start the talks. So how this whole SDN story began in a very high level summary, it's nothing new if you look at really when this whole event started. It's nearly 15 years before when companies like AT&T started finding problems in the network. So essentially, if you look at the real problem, and as you see in the slide, is the network management was always a problem for most of these big companies. So why exactly in 2001 and 2002 this became a problem for everybody? So the reason was, if you remember, around 97, 98 to 2000, we had an era which if you remember, were called as the dot-com bubble and the boom, right? So when many of these companies started using internet as a means of publishing and doing e-commerce business, so that essentially caused companies like AT&T and other large network service providers bring up their service levels, the networks to a larger level, and at that point of time, the network management, finding configuration, making configuration more simple, especially troubleshooting, was a big problem for these companies. So that's when these companies started, the big companies actually started evaluating that how can they actually solve this problem by some methods and means. And eventually in the next year, in the following years, in 2004 and 2005, we had some universities, like prominent universities like the Stanfords and the MITs in US. They picked up this topic and they came with some concepts. And one of the projects which was very popular is called as the RCP, the Routing Control Plane, which was essentially a way of managing the entire network by using tools which the network operators were very familiar with, things like BGP and other routing tools. Between 2004 and 2005, up till 2008, there was not much progress in the RCP way of doing SDN. The reason was RCP could do things what a typical control plane protocol do, but then people really wanted to do things beyond a control plane level. So what you see is people were actually looking forward to a Swiss knife, sort of a one tool which does everything, which was not possible with BGP. So people wanted to do things like put firewall rules with ACL rules, QoS and things like that using BGP, which was not possible. So the project kind of got stalled up, and only few companies were using it. It was still in the universities. Until 2008 and 2009, OpenFlow came up. OpenFlow essentially disaggregated the entire control plane and the data plane. And you could do multiple things which you couldn't do with traditional routing control protocols, even at a low level. But then it has its own challenges, because with OpenFlow, you had to do things what the traditional routing protocols could do, using like L3 and BGP and L2 protocols. And apart from that, you had to actually do the low-level things. And the complexity was you had to do things on a programmable level, and then do things like scaling and security over OpenFlow. So what eventually happened was the network operators, like the common network operators who are running the enterprises, day-to-day enterprises, they really couldn't use OpenFlow for solving the problems. So who actually used OpenFlow? It was essentially the universities. So the Stanford University, the Georgia Tech University, they actually used OpenFlow in their campus networks. And of course, the big companies like Google's and Microsoft's in the world, they use OpenFlow to solve their own problems. But it never really came back into the as a forerunner, as a technology which we could use to solve the basic problem of network management and network troubleshooting. So again, now 2017, we are still in SDN world. So what is really still the problem which we are trying to solve? The problem we are still trying to solve is that of network management, troubleshooting, and doing configuration with ease, which is still not solved to the way the network operators really want it to. So what we have now, and this is just a representation of the modern controllers which we have, is a tool set which uses OpenFlow as well as traditional routing protocols to solve the problem. So you have concepts like OpenFlow, you have concepts like BGP-LS, PCE, Alto, and other protocols as a part of the controller which are solving the basic problem which still exists. So if you go back to the so the problem even right now which stays is that it's only with a mix of technologies we're able to solve this SDN controller problem. And most of these problems which has been successful and people are actually using is based on proprietary solutions by many of the incumbent companies. We still don't have a real open networking technology based controller which is used successfully and widely and popular. And this is one of the topics which we have to really think about as a group. And it's also a charter for the multiple groups which are lying around, like the ONF, the ONAP, and the Linux Foundation. And with this, I sort of, I kickstart the actual discussion. We have a couple of, primarily 3 topics to be talked about. We will talk about the network analytics and the network telemetry. We will have a panel session and individual talks about it. And I talk about PCs, which is one of the control protocols which SDN controllers use. And we'll have a little bit of a history in the SDN as to, in the IETF especially, that what sort of protocols in the IETF are serving the SDN requirement. With that, I ask Vishnu to continue with the next set of presentations. Thank you.